Morning rituals and silent promises. The alarm clock buzzed at exactly 5:30 a.m., slicing through the darkness of Derek Patterson's bedroom. His hand reached out instinctively, silencing the noise before it could fully wake him from dreams he barely remembered. 3 years of the same routine had made everything automatic. Wake up, shower, dress, pretend everything was fine. But today felt different. Today mattered. Derek stood in front of his closet, studying the row of suits like a general surveying troops before battle. The charcoal gray or the navy blue? Grace would have known immediately. She always had opinions about his clothes, laughing at his indecision while pulling out the perfect combination. "You overthink everything except the things that actually matter," she used to say, her fingers adjusting his collar with a tenderness that made ordinary mornings feel sacred. He chose the navy suit. It felt right somehow. Professional, yet approachable. The white shirt was crisp, fresh from the dry cleaner. As he knotted his burgundy tie, muscle memory took over. His reflection stared back at him, older than he remembered, new lines around his eyes that mapped 3 years of learning to exist without her. The accident had been sudden. A rainy Tuesday afternoon, a distracted driver, and everything Derek thought was permanent became a memory he carried everywhere. The weight of moving forward in the kitchen. Coffee brewed while Derek reviewed his notes one final time. Quantum Dynamics was one of the most innovative firms on the East Coast, known for disrupting traditional business models with creative solutions. The position was senior financial strategist, exactly the kind of challenge he needed. For 3 years, he had been coasting, taking safe jobs that required minimal emotional investment. But his best friend Mitchell had pushed him to apply. "You can't hide forever," Mitchell had said over drinks 2 months ago. "Grace wouldn't want you living half a life. She'd want you out there, doing something that matters." Mitchell was right. Grace had always been about purpose, about making work mean something beyond paychecks and promotions. She had volunteered at youth centers, believed in businesses that prioritized people over profits, and dreamed of a world where success was measured in positive impact rather than quarterly earnings. Derek had loved that about her, even when her idealism clashed with his pragmatic nature. His phone buzzed. A text from Mitchell. "Today's the day, brother. You've got this. Remember what we practiced. Be yourself, but like the confident version." Derek smiled despite his nerves. Mitchell had helped him prepare, conducting mock interviews, challenging his answers, building up his confidence. They had been friends since college, and Mitchell had been there through everything, including the darkest days after Grace died. Some friendships were forged in good times. Others were forged in survival, and those bonds never broke. Arrival at a new world, the Quantum Dynamics building rose 30 stories into the morning sky, all glass and steel and modern ambition. Derek arrived 20 minutes early, a habit Grace had instilled in him. Early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable, she would say with mock seriousness before dissolving into laughter. He could still hear that laugh sometimes, in quiet moments when memory felt more real than the present. The lobby was impressive. Sleek furniture, abstract art on the walls, and a waterfall feature that created a calming background noise. Young professionals moved through the space with purpose, their conversations energetic and engaged. Everyone seemed to believe in what they were doing here. Derek felt a flutter of something he had not experienced in years, excitement mixed with genuine hope. Derek Patterson? A woman in her late 20s approached with a warm smile. "I'm Rebecca Morgan, executive assistant to our CEO. Welcome to Quantum Dynamics." "We're so glad you're here." Rebecca led him through security and into an elevator that climbed smoothly upward. She made small talk about the company culture, the recent expansion, the exciting projects in development. Derek listened, nodded, and tried to calm the anxious energy building in his chest. This was just an interview. Just a conversation. Nothing more, but as the elevator doors opened on the 28th floor, Derek's carefully constructed composure began to crack. The unexpected introduction. The executive floor was beautiful, but surprisingly casual. No stuffy conference rooms or intimidating mahogany furniture. Instead, there were open spaces, collaborative work areas, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living painting. Employees worked at standing desks, sat in comfortable lounge chairs, and moved freely between spaces. It felt more like a creative studio than a corporate headquarters. "Our CEO believes in breaking down barriers," Rebecca explained, noticing his expression. "Traditional hierarchy creates distance. Distance creates disconnection, and disconnection kills innovation." She led him to a corner office with glass walls. Inside, a woman sat at a modern desk, focused intently on her computer screen. Derek's first thought was that this must be someone's assistant or maybe a project manager, because the woman was wearing dark jeans, white sneakers, and a soft gray sweater that looked more appropriate for a coffee shop than a CEO's office. "Natalie, your 9 o'clock is here," Rebecca said gently. The woman looked up, and Derek's world tilted sideways. She was striking. Not in a conventional corporate way, but with an energy that seemed to fill the room. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup except maybe a touch of something that made her eyes seem brighter. She stood, walked around the desk, and extended her hand with a smile that was both professional and genuinely welcoming. "Derek Patterson, I've been looking forward to meeting you. I'm Natalie Reeves." Derek shook her hand, his mind struggling to process multiple things simultaneously. This was the CEO, the woman who had built quantum dynamics from a small startup into an industry leader. The innovator who had been featured in business magazines and invited to speak at conferences, and she was wearing sneakers. "Thank you for having me," he managed, his voice steadier than he felt. But it was not her casual attire that had knocked him off balance. As Natalie gestured for him to sit, her sleeve shifted slightly, revealing a bracelet on her left wrist. It was simple but distinctive. Silver links with small turquoise stones, each one hand-selected and set by an artisan. Derek knew that bracelet. He knew it because he had given one exactly like it to Grace for their second anniversary. The jeweler had told them it was a custom design. It's one of only 2 ever made. Grace had loved it, wore it constantly, and had been wearing it the day she died. The hospital had returned her personal effects in a clear plastic bag, and Derek had carefully placed the bracelet in a small wooden box he kept on his dresser. He looked at it every morning, a tangible connection to someone who felt increasingly like a beautiful dream he had once had. But here, in an office high above the city, on the wrist of a woman he had never met, was what appeared to be the only other bracelet of its kind in existence. "Questions without answers, Derek? Are you all right?" Natalie's voice pulled him back to the present. She was looking at him with concern, her head tilted slightly in a gesture that sent another shock of recognition through him. Grace used to do that exact same thing when she was trying to read his mood. "Sorry." Just a bit overwhelmed by the view, he lied, gesturing toward the windows. Natalie smiled. "It never gets old. I specifically chose this office because of those windows. Reminds me that we're part of something bigger than quarterly reports and profit margins." Her words, her tone, even her philosophy, seemed to echo Grace's voice. Derek forced himself to focus, to remember why he was here. This was an interview, a job opportunity, nothing more. The bracelet was probably just a coincidence. Maybe the jeweler had lied about it being unique. Maybe someone had commissioned a replica. But deep in his chest, something whispered that coincidences this specific did not exist. Natalie sat back in her chair, crossing her legs casually. "I'll be honest with you, Derek. I don't do traditional interviews. I've read your resume. I've seen your credentials. I know you're qualified. What I want to know is who you are and why you're here. Not the rehearsed answer. The real one." Her directness caught him off guard. He had prepared for standard questions, competency assessments, and discussions about his 5-year plan. He had not prepared for honesty. "I'm someone who's been stuck," he heard himself say. "Professionally capable, but emotionally distant. I've spent 3 years doing work that pays the bills but doesn't mean anything. I'm here because I need to remember what it feels like to care about something again." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Natalie. Her expression softened, and something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Or a recognition of a kindred spirit who had also known loss. "That's the most honest answer I've heard in a long time," she said quietly. "Tell me, Derek, what makes work meaningful to you?" And as he began to answer, carefully choosing words that would impress without revealing too much, his eyes kept drifting back to that bracelet, to the impossible possibility that somehow, in ways he could not begin to understand, the past was reaching forward into the present, refusing to stay buried, demanding to be acknowledged. The interview had barely begun, but Derek already knew that nothing about this day would go according to plan. The interview that felt like destiny, the conversation flowed in unexpected directions. Natalie did not ask about forecasting models or risk assessment strategies. Instead, she asked questions that peeled back layers Derek had spent years building. What did he believe about the purpose of business? How did he define success? When had he last felt truly passionate about his work? Derek found himself answering with an honesty that surprised him. He talked about his early career idealism, how he had once believed finance could be a force for good, how somewhere along the way, between spreadsheets and board meetings, he had lost sight of that vision. He did not mention Grace, but her influence colored every word. She had been his compass, pointing him toward meaning when he got lost in numbers. Natalie listened with complete attention, occasionally nodding or asking follow-up questions that showed she was not just hearing him, but truly understanding. There was something familiar in the way she engaged, a quality of presence that made the conversation feel less like an interview and more like a reunion with someone he had known in another life. "You know what I find interesting?" Natalie said, leaning forward slightly. "Most candidates try to tell me what they think I want to hear. You're telling me what you actually think." "That's rare." Derek smiled faintly. "Someone very important once told me that authenticity is the only real currency in relationships, professional or otherwise." "Wise person," Natalie said, and something flickered across her face. A shadow of memory or perhaps recognition. The bracelet caught the light again as she gestured, and Derek forced himself not to stare. "You about quantum dynamics," Natalie continued, standing and walking toward the windows. "We're not just another consulting firm. Our mission is to help businesses align profit with purpose, to prove that doing good and doing well are not mutually exclusive. Every client we take on must demonstrate genuine commitment to positive social impact." Derek stood and joined her at the window. The city stretched out below them, a maze of buildings and lives and stories intersecting in ways people rarely noticed. "That philosophy must make client acquisition challenging," he observed. "It does," Natalie admitted. "We turn away more business than we accept. But the clients we do work with, they're changing industries, reshaping communities, creating models others will follow. That's worth more than any profit margin." Her words resonated so deeply that Derek had to look away. This was exactly the kind of work Grace had always believed in, the kind of work she had encouraged him to pursue before fear of instability held him back. "Lunch and Revelations, I have an unconventional request," Natalie said, checking her watch. "It's almost noon. Instead of continuing this in the office, would you be willing to grab lunch? There's a place nearby that makes the best sandwiches in the city. We can talk more casually." Derek hesitated only a moment before agreeing. Nothing about this interview was conventional. Why should lunch be any different? They walked 3 blocks to a small deli tucked between larger buildings. The kind of place that survived on quality and word of mouth rather than location and advertising. Inside smelled like fresh bread and roasted vegetables. Natalie clearly was a regular because the owner greeted her by name and already knew her usual order. They found a table by the window, and for a few minutes, they ate in comfortable silence. Derek watched people hurry past on the sidewalk, each absorbed in their own urgency, and felt strangely peaceful. When was the last time he had felt this present in a moment? "Can I ask you something personal?" Natalie said suddenly. Derek looked up, nervous but curious. "Of course." "The bracelet," she said, touching it gently. "You noticed it earlier?" "Yes." "I saw your reaction." His heart began to pound. "It's beautiful and familiar." Natalie studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to cross some invisible line. Finally, she unclasped the bracelet and handed it to him. "Look at the inside of the largest stone." Derek held it carefully, tilting it toward the light. Engraved in delicate script were 2 initials, G.H. Grace Harris, her maiden name. The deli sounds faded into background noise. Derek's vision blurred slightly as 3 years of carefully managed grief rose up in his chest. He looked at Natalie, questions and impossible hope colliding in his mind. "Her name was Grace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Grace Harris. Before she became Grace Patterson." Natalie's eyes filled with recognition and sadness. "I knew her. We were friends when we were young. Best friends, actually. For 3 summers at a camp in the mountains. We lost touch after my family moved abroad. I tried to find her over the years, but never could." Stories from before the afternoon. Sun shifted, casting golden light across their table. Natalie began to speak, and Derek listened to stories about a Grace he had known, but from angles he had never seen. "We were 12 when we met," Natalie said, smiling at the memory. "Camp Pinewood. Grace was the girl who made friends with everyone, even the counselors. She had this way of making people feel seen, like they mattered." Derek nodded, his throat tight. "She never lost that. We spent 3 summers together, hiking, swimming, staying up late, talking about everything and nothing. Grace had big dreams even then. She wanted to change the world, make it kinder somehow." Natalie paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. "The last summer, before I left for London with my family, she gave me this bracelet. Said she had one just like it. That way, we'd always be connected, even if we were apart. She wore hers every day," Derek said softly. "Right up until the end." Natalie's eyes glistened. "I only found out what happened 6 months ago. I was going through old camp records, trying to locate her. I found a mutual friend who told me about the accident." "I'm so sorry, Derek. Truly." They sat in shared silence. 2 people connected by someone who is no longer there, but whose presence filled the space between them. Derek felt tears on his cheeks, but did not bother wiping them away. "She used to talk about camp sometimes," he said. "About a friend named Nat who understood her completely. I never made the connection until now." "I thought about her so often over the years," Natalie admitted. "I wondered what she was doing, if she was happy, if she remembered me. And then when I finally found out, I realized I was too late to tell her how much those summers meant to me." Derek reached across the table and gently took the bracelet, holding it up to the light. The turquoise stones glowed like small pieces of sky. Grace believed everything happened for a reason. That people come into our lives exactly when they're supposed to. I stopped believing that after she died. But now, sitting here with you, I don't know, maybe she was right. Understanding through grief, they returned to the office late in the afternoon. But the interview had transformed into something else entirely. Natalie showed him around quantum dynamics properly, introducing him to team members, explaining projects, sharing her vision for the company's future. Every detail reflected values Grace had championed: sustainability, community investment, ethical practices, people over profits. In a conference room, Natalie pulled up a presentation on a community development project. "This is something we're launching next quarter. Financial literacy programs for underserved neighborhoods, teaching people how to build wealth, start businesses, break cycles of poverty." Derek stared at the screen, his chest tightening. Grace volunteered with a program exactly like this. She believed financial education was the key to systemic change. Natalie turned to him, understanding dawning in her expression. "Then you know why this matters. Why it has to be done right." "I do," Derek said, "and I want to help make it happen." They talked for hours, the conversation flowing between professional strategy and personal memory. Natalie shared stories about building quantum dynamics from nothing, about the failures and breakthroughs, about learning to lead with empathy rather than authority. Derek found himself opening up in ways he had not with anyone since Grace died, talking about his grief, his guilt, his fear of moving forward. "You know what Grace told me once?" Natalie said as evening light filled the office. "We were 16, sitting on the dock at camp, watching the sunset. She said that love doesn't end when people leave. It just changes form, becomes memory, becomes influence, becomes the reason we do the things we do." Derek felt something shift inside him, loosening of the tight grip he had kept on his heart for 3 years. "She was always wiser than the rest of us." "She was," Natalie agreed. and she'd be really angry if she knew you were wasting your talents on work that doesn't matter, that you were hiding from life because losing her hurt too much. The words were gentle but firm, and they cut through Derek's defenses, like light through fog. Mitchell had said similar things, but hearing it from someone who had known Grace, who'd carried a piece of her forward, made it impossible to ignore. An offer in a beginning, as the day drew to a close. Natalie walked Derek to the elevator. Rebecca had long since gone home, and the office was quiet, except for a few dedicated employees working late. "I'm going to be direct," Natalie said. "I want to offer you the position. Not because of Grace, though that connection matters to me more than you know, but because in our conversations today, I saw someone who understands what we're trying to build here. Someone who's ready to do work that means something." Derek felt emotion rise in his throat. "I don't know what to say, so you'll think about it," Natalie said, with a small smile. "Sleep on it. Make sure it's what you want. But Derek, I hope you'll say yes. I think Grace would be happy knowing we found each other, that her memory is bringing something good into the world." The elevator arrived, and Derek stepped inside. As the doors began to close, he held them open for a moment longer. "Natalie, thank you. For today, for remembering her, for giving me a reason to remember why I chose this career in the first place. Thank you for being open to it," she replied. "Takes courage to start over." On the ride down, Derek looked at his reflection in the polished elevator walls. He looked different somehow, lighter, as if a weight he had been carrying had finally begun to ease. Outside, the city was alive with evening energy. Derek walked slowly, in no hurry to get home. His phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell. "How did it go?" Derek smiled and typed back, "I'll tell you everything over dinner." "But Mitchell?" "I think things are about to change." He stopped at a small park, sat on a bench, and looked up at the darkening sky. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that included joy, purpose, and connection. Not as a betrayal of Grace, but as an honoring of everything she had believed in. The bracelet story had seemed impossible that morning, but now it felt like exactly what it was: Grace's final gift, delivered through time and circumstance, reminding him that love does not end. It transforms. And sometimes, if you are brave enough to stay open, it brings you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it most. The decision. That changed everything. Derek did not sleep much that night. He sat in his living room with the lights off, city glow filtering through the windows, replaying every moment of the day. The interview that became a revelation. The bracelet that connected past to present. Natalie's stories about a Grace he had known but through different eyes. And the offer. Waiting for his answer like a door standing open to a future he had stopped believing in. At 2 a.m., he finally opened the wooden box on his dresser. Grace's bracelet lay inside, exactly where he had placed it 3 years ago. He held it up next to the memory of Natalie's identical piece, imagining them as they were meant to be, two halves of a promise made by young girls who believed friendship could transcend distance and time. "What are you trying to tell me?" He whispered into the darkness. The answer came not in words, but in feeling. A warmth in his chest, a lightness in his shoulders. Grace had always pushed him toward growth, toward courage, toward the person he was capable of becoming. Why would death change that? By dawn, Derek knew his answer. First day of the rest of his life, 2 weeks later. Derek walked into Quantum Dynamics as their new senior financial strategist. The building felt different now that it was his workplace rather than just an interview location. More real, more full of possibility. Rebecca greeted him with genuine warmth. "Welcome to the team. Natalie's in an early meeting, but she asked me to get you settled. Your office is ready." Not cubicle. Derek had not had his own office in years. The space was modest, but bright, with windows overlooking the city and enough room for the personal touches that made a workplace feel human. On the desk sat a welcome card signed by the entire executive team and a small potted plant with a note from Natalie. "Every new beginning needs something alive to tend. Looking forward to growing alongside you." Derek smiled, feeling that same strange sense of rightness he had felt during the interview. This was where he was supposed to be. The morning passed in a blur of introductions, system logins, and orientation materials. His team consisted of 4 other financial strategists, each brilliant in their own way and genuinely excited about the work they were doing. No corporate cynicism, no jaded attitudes. Just smart people who believed their skills could make the world slightly better. At lunch, Mitchell called, "How's day 1? "Honestly, it feels like coming home to a place I've never been before," Derek said, aware of how strange that sounded. "That's called happiness, brother. Get used to it." Community project that afternoon. Natalie invited Derek to join a planning meeting for the financial literacy initiative she had mentioned. The conference room was filled with people from different departments, educators, marketing specialists, community outreach coordinators, and financial experts. "Everyone, this is Derek Patterson," Natalie announced. "He'll be leading the financial modeling for the project and helping us ensure long-term sustainability." The meeting was unlike any Derek had attended in his career. Yes, they discussed budgets and timelines, but they also talked about impact, about the single mother who could start a business with the right knowledge, about the teenager who could break a cycle of debt with proper education, about communities transformed not through charity, but through empowerment. Derek found himself contributing ideas he did not know he had, suggesting partnerships with local banks, proposing a mentorship component, sketching out a funding model that could scale to other cities. His mind worked in ways it had not in years, fired by purpose rather than just professional obligation. After the meeting, Natalie caught up with him in the hallway. "You were brilliant in there. Those ideas about the mentorship program? That could be huge." "It felt right," Derek said simply, "like the work I was meant to be doing all along." Natalie smiled, and in her expression, Derek saw echoes of Grace's belief that everyone had gifts meant to be shared. "Want to take a walk? I need some air, and I'd love to hear more of your thoughts." They walked to a nearby park, the same one Derek had sat in after his interview. Autumn was painting the trees in shades of amber and crimson, and the air carried that crisp quality that made everything feel more vivid. "Can I tell you something?" Natalie said as they found a bench. "When I started quantum dynamics, I was terrified. Not of failing, but of succeeding in a way that didn't matter. Of building something profitable but empty. What changed?" "I remembered Grace," Natalie said softly. "Remembered those summers when she talked about the kind of world she wanted to help create, where success was measured in lives improved rather than dollars accumulated. I realized that if I was going to build a company, it had to honor those values. Had to be something that would make 12-year-old me and 12-year-old Grace proud." Derek felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. "She'd be so proud of what you've built, and so grateful that you remembered." "I think she sent you to me," Natalie said quietly. "I know how that sounds. But that bracelet connection? The timing of your application right when we needed someone with your skills and perspective. That's not coincidence. That's Grace, still looking out for both of us, healing through purpose over the following weeks." Derek threw himself into the community project with an intensity he had not felt since before Grace died. He worked late, arrived early, and filled notebooks with strategies and ideas. But unlike his previous workaholism, which had been about avoidance, this felt like participation, like finally showing up for his own life. He and Natalie developed an easy working relationship that gradually deepened into genuine friendship. They had lunch together regularly, sometimes talking business, but often sharing stories about Grace. Natalie's memories from camp, Derek's memories from their life together. Slowly, through shared remembering, Grace became less a wound and more a presence that connected them. One evening, working late on financial projections, Derek looked up to find Natalie standing in his doorway. "Go home," she said with mock sternness. "The spreadsheets will still be there tomorrow." "Just finishing this last model," Derek protested. Natalie walked in and closed his laptop. "Derek, I appreciate your dedication, but part of doing meaningful work is maintaining balance. You can't pour from an empty cup." He leaned back in his chair, realizing how exhausted he was. Grace used to say that, almost exactly those words. Then you should listen, Natalie said gently. Come on, I'll walk out with you. Outside the night was cool and clear. They walked slowly toward the parking garage, neither in a hurry to end the conversation. Can I ask you something? Derek said. Do you ever feel guilty for being happy after losing someone? Natalie stopped walking. Every day, she admitted. I felt guilty when I laughed for the first time after my father died. Guilty when I enjoyed a beautiful sunset. Guilty when I realized hours had passed without thinking about him. But then I realized something. Guilt was just another way of holding on. And sometimes, holding on prevents us from honoring someone properly. How do you honor them properly? By living, Natalie said simply. By taking the lessons they taught us and putting them into action. By becoming the people they believed we could be. Grace believed in purpose, in kindness, in making the world better. Every day you show up and do this work, you're honoring her. Not by staying stuck in grief, but by moving forward with her values as your guide. Derek felt something break open inside him. Not painfully, but like ice melting after a long winter. Thank you, he whispered. I needed to hear that. The launch event 3 months after Derek joined Quantum Dynamics, they held a launch event for the financial literacy program. Community leaders, potential students, local media, and supporters filled a renovated community center in one of the neighborhoods. The program would serve. Derek stood near the back, watching Natalie address the crowd. She spoke with passion and clarity about breaking cycles, creating opportunity, and proving that business could be a force for genuine good. The audience listened with the kind of attention people give when they hear something they have been waiting their whole lives to hear. Afterward, as people mingled and shared refreshments, an older woman approached Derek. You're one of the people who made this happen? Just part of the team, Derek said modestly. Well, I want to thank you. My granddaughter's going to be in the first class. She's got dreams of opening her own bakery, but doesn't know where to start. This program? This could change her whole life. Derek felt emotion rise in his throat. This was why the work mattered. Not the financial models or strategic plans, but the grandmother who could see a future for her granddaughter. The ripple effects of knowledge shared and opportunity created. Mitchell found him later, grinning broadly. Look at you, actually changing the world. Grace would be losing her mind with pride right now. I hope so, Derek said, meaning it full circle that night. Derek and Natalie sat on the community center's roof deck, looking out over the neighborhood. Music and laughter floated up from the celebration continuing below. The city lights spread out like a constellation of human stories, each one mattering, each one connected to all the others in ways mostly invisible. I've been thinking, Natalie said, about expanding the program, using this model in other cities, building something that could really scale. That would take significant funding, Derek observed. But I think we could make the case to investors. The social impact data alone is compelling. Would you want to lead that expansion? Be the financial architect for something potentially huge? Derek looked at her, seeing not just his boss, but his friend. Someone who understood his past and believed in his future. Someone connected to him through loss, but building towards something hopeful. I'd be honored, he said. Natalie smiled and touched the bracelet on her wrist. A gesture Derek had seen her do countless times when she was thinking about something important. Grace would love this. That her belief in both of us is creating something neither of us could have built alone. She always was the smart one, Derek agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe. Derek thought about the journey from that morning 3 months ago, when he had stood before his mirror. Preparing for an interview he thought would just be another job. How wrong he had been. How impossibly right things had turned out. His phone buzzed. A text from Mitchell. Dinner next week? Want to hear about all the world-changing you're doing? Derek smiled and replied, absolutely. I've got a lot to tell you. He looked at Natalie. Thank you. For taking a chance on me. For understanding about Grace. For creating a place where work actually means something. Thank you for showing up, Natalie replied. For being brave enough to start over. For trusting that maybe, just maybe, the universe knows what it's doing. The bracelet caught the light from the deck lanterns, glowing softly. Derek thought about its twin, still resting in the wooden box on his dresser. Two pieces of the same promise, separated by years and circumstance, but finally fulfilling their purpose. Connecting people who needed each other. Bridging past and future, proving that love in all its forms never really ends. It just transforms, waits, and appears again exactly when and where it is needed most. New beginnings. Derek returned home that night, feeling something he had not experienced in years: complete peace. Not the absence of grief, because Grace's loss would always be part of him, but peace alongside the grief. Room for both sorrow and joy. Space for memory and hope. He opened the wooden box and looked at Grace's bracelet one last time before making a decision. The next day, he would ask Natalie if she thought Grace's mother would approve of donating it to the program. Perhaps it could be given to a student who completed the course with exceptional dedication. A symbol of potential recognized and nurtured, of one woman's belief in others, continuing to ripple outward. Grace would like that. She had never been one for objects locked away in boxes. She had believed in things being used, shared, passed forward. Derek placed the bracelet back carefully and turned on his computer. He had ideas to capture, plans to sketch out, a future to build, not as a replacement for what he had lost, but as a continuation of everything Grace had taught him about living with purpose and love. Outside his window, the city hummed with 10,000 stories unfolding simultaneously. Somewhere in that vast collection of human experience, other people were learning to grieve, to hope, to start again. Other lives were being transformed by unexpected connections and impossible coincidences that were not coincidences at all. And Derek Patterson, who had come prepared for a serious interview only to discover his new boss wearing jeans and carrying pieces of his past on her wrist, was finally ready to write his next chapter. Not alone, but accompanied by memory, guided by purpose, and supported by friendships both old and new. The interview had changed everything, but the real transformation had nothing to do with jobs or careers or professional success. It was about a heart learning to beat again after believing it had forgotten. How, and that, Derek knew, was the most important work of all.